I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Antoni Watts of Cashcow Pro today, who it turns out, and I didn't know this before I interviewed him for the podcast, but is an expert on sourcing from China. And when I say expert, I mean he's got really, really deep background and did it for years. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity to grill poor Antoni about this. So the first thing is, Antoni, just remind us a little bit about your background as regards sourcing from China and the Far East.
Sure. So I moved to Hong Kong and China when I was 19 and started working for an importer who sold to a public company in the UK. And really, the first week on the ground was going into China, visiting factories, finding products for that particular retailer. 18 months down the road, I started my own sourcing business, opened an office in China, had an office in Hong Kong, had a quality control team, and literally was developing 2,000-3,000 products a year for big retailers back in Europe and big distributors like Tesco, O2, Orange, Vodafone, everything from their packaging to promotional products, as well as electronic speakers, iPhone accessories, FM transmitters, all kinds of different products. And I was visiting maybe 3 or 4 factories a day on average. I've been to China more than 500 times when I was living in Hong Kong, and I lived in China doing the same role as well. And so for around 7-8 years, I was on the ground, developing products, sourcing, manufacturing, checking the quality with our team, and just managing the end-to-end supply chain for these importers, distributors, and retailers in China and Hong Kong itself.
Wow. So let me get this straight. You were out there at the age of 19. By the age of what, 20, 21, you were running your own business in China?
Yeah, because really, I didn't need much capital to get going because all I was doing was Tesco would place an order and the deposit up front, I would pay the factory their deposit out of that. And so it was, cash flow positive business. I could get going off the ground just being a middleman, an agent, before I started to develop my own products.
Interesting. Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, and sort of thing that a lot of Amazon sellers, if they're more advanced, are beginning to explore doing themselves. I mean, I've had little sort of dips into doing things that way. Certainly cash flow, is a really important thing. So now let's talk about sourcing. What do you think the main mistakes, the top 3 mistakes are made by Amazon sellers in sourcing from China? And let's think about the little guy just starting out. What do you think are the main things that they tend to do wrong?
I would say the number one thing is people rush too much. Everyone's trying to get a product onto Amazon tomorrow. And as a result, you might not be finding the best suppliers. You might not be getting the best price. You're in a hurry. It's better to go deep. It's better if you're thinking about selling a copper mug, give the same example, that you contact every single supplier available for that product on global sources, on Alibaba, through the trade show websites. You want to go deep across and find as many people that make that product as possible, so your understanding improves. That will help later with price negotiations, but also help you in developing the product. If you make a mistake on product selection and you choose the wrong factory, it's going to cost you big time later. You're going to lose months and potentially thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not saying, do so much analysis that you stall, but you don't have to complete everything in a week. Give it time to understand the product, get the samples, check, talk to the manufacturers, do the work and talking with them back and forth about how you can improve the product. So that would be number one, is rushing. The second one, which is kind of follows on from that, is not going to China. Amazon, the prices are trending lower and lower. The guy who has the best deal, the best product is going to win over the next 12, 24 months. Yes, maybe you can bring it in and compete at the price now, but if you manage to buy it 20% cheaper than everyone else, you can cut the price by 10%, still be profitable, and bleed out all your competition. So the long-term success of Amazon depends on you having the best relationships, the best suppliers, and the best product. And so to do that, really, you need to go to the place where the products are coming from and understand the factories, how it's made, where you can improve things, etc. And what you see online represents maybe 1% of what's available in China in terms of product. Not even, actually. If you go to a factory that makes bags or iPad cases, they would have had 10 products on their website that they show you. They've got 10,000 in their showroom from all the customers around the world that they've made that product for. You know, I used to go to visit partner factories that had been working with a long time, and they got some new great products sitting on the shelf, great technology, something no one else has got that's going to sell like crazy. Did they email me and tell me about it? No. Is it on their website? No. Is it in a catalog? No. How did I find out about it? I stumbled across it when walking around the factory. The other thing you'll do is when you're in the factories, you'll see what they're making for other people. You'll see the quality of that product. You see what they're making for the competition. You start to build a relationship with the seller. Maybe they'll say, oh, this guy from the UK, he sells on Amazon. He's making this product. Why don't you do this for the US market? For example, you start to know more than the average person. If you're serious about making this your business and winning, then the more you know, the more likely you are to win. So that would be number two, is go to the source, the point of origin of your product, and get to really know it inside out. And the final one would be not inspecting the goods before shipment, not really having a quality plan in place, because that has a knock-on effect. You know, if there's an issue with it and it's sent into Amazon, you can lose your account over the number of products being sent back, for example, or you have to do more refunds than normal, which eats into your profitability. It's for every new factory, and actually for every shipment we ever did, we sent in an inspector to check the products before it ever left China, before it got on a boat or a plane, because once it's flown over to the market, it's more expensive to send it back. It's more expensive to fix. So absolutely essential to check the quality of the product. Back, you should use the sample to say, hey, what could go wrong with this? How do we prevent that? And have that discussion with the factory. They know, because they've made that product 100 times. They know maybe it can scratch here. Maybe this corner is going to get damaged. By having that conversation up front, you can actually prevent a lot of the headaches before the product's even made. So those would be the main things.
Wow, again, that's a pretty comprehensive list. So just going through those, I think those are really good starting points. So the first thing about not rushing, I totally agree with you, and I think it can get completely overwhelming. And I'll give you an example. Before Christmas, my business partner and I were working, I don't know, around the August time to try and get stuff in reasonably quickly to test things out in Q4. And we ended up with something like 65 supplier conversations going on in our email inbox, which, being over systematic at that point, we had put into I can't remember what the tool is called, but there's some tool that will enable you to put things into little sort of conversational paths and put it through a sort of system. Can't remember what it is now, but that's probably a good thing, because if you try and use it, you're going to drive yourself nuts. So what is the process that you would recommend to try and be thorough and yet not overwhelm yourself with emails and things like that?
It's difficult, because at the beginning, you know almost nothing about the product and you don't have any contacts with the supply chain. As you in the industry longer, that's not so much of a problem anymore, even hundreds of emails, because you know what's good and what's bad. I would just say you're looking at Q4 and you're researching the product in August. I did the same thing when I first launched some products on Amazon. I wanted it there next month or the following month. You just need to step back and look at it. Okay, so I want to be successful on Amazon over the next 12, 24 months, and then allow the time to develop the product, test the product, try different things up front, instead of trying to rush it, because that's going to cause mistakes. Maybe you throw 20 products at the wall and only one sticks. Yes, if you do crazy amounts of analysis, that could still happen, correct. But just block off X amount of time to look for and develop products. Give it 6 weeks to develop a particular product or get a product off the ground. Then you've given yourself the breathing room and the thinking time to think, how can I improve this? Is it a good product? Can I improve the packaging? How can I change the product so I can maybe spend 20 cents more but add $5 of value to the product? There's lots of tweaks you can do like that you might not see if you just take, okay, I've got this from Chinese supplier, it's ready, I'm just going to put it in a box, send it. So it's just allowing that extra time to go through. You're always going to have a lot of emails, and I recommend people set up a separate email account for sourcing, because the amount of spam you get is unreal. and it'll be for the next 10 years, you'll get emails from those suppliers. So by having a separate account for the sourcing, systematically going through the emails, putting together the information on the product, and then the important part is pushing back to the factory, saying, what can we do to make this cheaper? What can we do to improve this product? What else? Can you show me photos of what your other customers are ordering? You'll get ideas for things that you can do with the product, that if you've set your mind on what the product is before you even go through that process, you might not have the best deal, the best value, the best price, or the best product at the end of the day. It's just allowing yourself to go through the process of product development.
I like the reality check that these things take so much time. And I think it's absolutely true. When I first went into Amazon, I was pitched into it from a very famous course I won't mention, but I think they gave the impression that you could be up and running within about a month. Now, I think that's because most of the guys who had sold it and affiliates were just doing probably supplements, sourced from the States. So obviously a lot quicker supply chain, and you don't have to deal with the language barrier and the time zone differences. But yeah, my experience is that 6 weeks is real fast. But I mean, 3 months is a good sort of rule of thumb to get a product, launched, or at least end manufacturing or something at the quickest, really. But also, yeah, I think it is one of those things where it is very, very hard to deal with the complexity generated by lots and lots of people, but you're going to have to be willing to get your hands dirty with that. I mean, one tip that I would have for anyone starting out is just to have a separate Gmail. Let's have kind of disposable Gmail email addresses, probably for each product line, because you may end up contacting 50 suppliers. And as you say, you do not want your normal email getting filled with spam, because the Chinese are very diligent at following up for a long time. I mean, I've been in this game for over 2.5 years now. And I know friends of mine who've been in it for longer, and they say, yeah, they never get rid of the spam. So that is a really important tip as well. Now, coming back to the third point you were talking about, so going to China, obviously much better way of sourcing. I know for a lot of the people listening that will seem a bit intimidating, but if you're at that point sooner or later, it's going to be worth doing. Let's move on for the moment to the inspection thing, which I think is more relevant immediately to everybody. How do you set up the process of making sure that you get the best quality? What are the main sort of steps that you need to take, and what sort of order would you take them in?
Okay, so the number one thing is to, when you're getting the sample, that's before even placing the orders, when you should set the quality standard with the factory. So most inspections, pre-shipment inspections, use AQL. You have you have the major defects and you have the minor defects. Really, you should be asking the factory to say, okay, I'm going to order this copper mug from you. Your other customers have ordered this in the past. Give me a list of what you consider major and minor defects that could happen with this product. And then they're the ones telling you these are the things that could go wrong. These are what other customers check for. You've already got a starting point as to what you can check for that particular product. And different methods of making products will cause more or less defects. I mean, if you're doing a fabric product, using one material is going to end up with way more defects than using another material. You want to know that up front. So it's really the investigative process, the back and forth with your supplier, asking, what other materials we can use? What are the potential issues with this as well? That would be really the first step of improving the product quality. The next is, every new factory I ever worked with, we would go in early on in the production, because you'll get a sample and the sample looks like this. And then for one reason or another, the production is quite different. And the sooner you catch that, the sooner you can fix that, the better. And so actually being on site helps. If you can't go there, there's dozens of services for 100 to 200 bucks a time that will go in and check the production early on in the process. And again, maybe everything looked fine for the sample. Maybe you've covered everything off with the factory in advance, but there's something in production which nobody expected, which is causing an issue. And so the sooner you catch that, the better. But I think it's really, the whole thing about quality is just thinking ahead and planning, how can we prevent any issues from coming up? Are we going in and checking and not just relying on their word? The pre-shipment inspection, everything's already made. Yeah, it's great that you're checking before it leaves China, but if you're trying to hit Q4, for example, and it has to be fixed and reworked, it's a bit late in the process. So for new suppliers, new relationship, You want to do more of the work up front. Then as you're reordering the same product, you still want to do a pre-shipment inspection, but you no longer need to go in earlier and check the goods from that particular factory as well. And it's just, I think some of it is common sense, is playing with the item yourself, using it yourself, seeing, oh, this stitching's weak. I'm selling these CrossFit gloves and this part's really weak. Guys, can you do a double stitching here when we do the actual order? It's messing around with the item that's going to catch some stuff, as well as the factory's input as to what you can do too. Because at the end of the day, they might, some of them just want to make it as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible. They have, dozens and dozens of orders that they want to fulfill. They may not be paying attention. It's your responsibility. The number one rule in China is, buyer beware. It's down to you to make sure that what you get from the manufacturer is what you want. And so it's you who has to do the work.
Brilliant. Thank you. So many golden nuggets there. I mean, the first thing, just to come back to what you were just saying, is I think if you haven't sold products before, and most of us don't have your kind of deep background in product development, then the first thing is, if you're a retail buyer of products, if that's all you've ever experienced, then you're used to being protected by consumer law and the sort of Western standards of quality control. That's the first thing. Yeah. The second thing is that even if you approached a British or American wholesaler or manufacturer, you'd be protected by a host of legislation which is highly enforced. There's inspection. The corruption levels in some European countries aren't great, but they're not anything like China. And so obviously there's a world corruption index, isn't there, which I think China is like 40 out of 100 on, which is basically bad. So the idea that you're protected by a legal framework is just a bit naive in China. I mean, you are in theory. In practice, yes, it's caveat emptor, as you say, exactly. So that's the mentality shift that is so important. The second thing I want to pull up on is what you just said, which I've not done, and it's so intelligent and so obvious, but I guess you need to be an expert like yourself to know this, which is to ask the supplier to sort of bid against himself, as it were, and just say, okay, tell me the main quality issues that have come up in the past. Because I always construct now a quality control checklist before I even place the order. So we have all the haggling about that up front, but it comes from me, and actually coming from the supplier, if you can get them to be even semi-honest, is a really smart move. So that's brilliant. That was, for me, this interview is worth it just to hear that. And I hope that the listeners are getting a ton of value from this, because I certainly am. So let's move on to a little bit more about choosing suppliers. So you've talked about inspecting during the process. So let's reverse back through to, let's say you're sourcing Alibaba or DHgate, which is what most people will do. How would you even start by selecting suppliers? How do you know which ones to even consider to start with?
Sure. I've got one simple recommendation. Contact all of them. Every single one. So if you're going to do a copper mug and there's 3,000 suppliers on Alibaba, you want to email every single one of those. Why do I say that? It's a lot of work, yeah. But at the end of the day, that's the only way you find diamonds in the rough, is because one factory might quote you $3 for the item, another $4.50, and there'll be the one-off factory that's $2 and way better quality. China's a numbers game. Price isn't an indicator of quality. It's just whatever the salesperson usually makes up. Or maybe that factory is expensive for that particular product, but cheaper for another product. There's so many factors that go into the price. So the only way you can ensure that, hey, I'm getting the best supplier for this, is to contact every single factory that's out there. So literally, I at the beginning, I would do that myself. I'd stay up all night for when we're doing 100 products for Christmas. I'd go through all the thousands of factories. But you could probably hire someone on Upwork or something similar to put out all those emails for you for $10, $20 at a time. But at least then you know that you have contacted 2,821 factories on Alibaba, and the stuff that goes into your inbox, you've maximized the chance of finding the best supplier because you've done the legwork up front. I think there's a common theme in everything I'm saying, which is the more you do up front, the more you get rewarded further down the line, is because you might find a factory which is a bit more remote than other people. Maybe they're not ranked yet on Alibaba. They're 30 pages in. Why? Alibaba is a paid system. The guys at the top pay more money to Alibaba. They're paying 20, 50 grand to be on there in the first place, and then they're bidding for keywords. So you're getting the guy, if you're only on page 1 or page 2 of Alibaba, who's paying the most, which means they're making the most margin, so they're selling the product at the highest price. By digging all the way through the pages, you eliminate the skew by them bidding for keywords for particular products on Alibaba. You're contacting all the manufacturers, not just the ones with big margin who can afford to spend and be ranked #1, but also the smaller factories. And I found that nearly all my products, the best deals that I got were maybe small factories of 20 to 100 people who didn't have good marketing. The English was a bit, not great, let's put it that way. And they were, harder to find and harder to maybe deal with, but they were honest, had good quality and a lower price because they weren't marketers. If you're only going to page 1 or page 2 of Alibaba or Global Sources, you're dealing with other marketers. And most likely, even though they're showing you pictures of a factory, even if you went there and they took you to a factory, you're actually dealing with an agent, and there's a fee for that. There's 20-30% extra in the cost to cover their fees for sorting you out.
Brilliant. Well, thank you again. A really golden nuggets here. And I wish I'd spoken to you 2 years ago when I started this whole thing. Because the thing you're saying about the marketing-led companies is so true, and it makes sense. But and yet it's so hard to remember that when you're dealing with complexity, you're trying to cut it down. And I get lazy sometimes as well, and I still get lazy sometimes and just try and source from page 1. And as you say, it could work for the next 6 months, but over time the price is going to get driven down and down. So you've got to do that work at some point anyway. But you're so right about really you want to get manufacturers who are terrible at marketing and have no idea about communication, but are really focused on manufacturing, right? I mean, agents are famously slippery about telling you whether they're agents. I mean, in fact, a friend of mine who also lives in China, another British guy, he said he had a girlfriend at one point. He was an agent. And even if the buyers, the people who bought from her came to visit, she'd go and put on the factory. She had 3 different factory uniforms for the main factory she worked for, and she'd go and put the factory uniform on and line up with everybody else in the factory. I mean, it was just the whole charade. There was nothing about it. So yeah, you're so right about the agents, and a 20% addition to your margin could be the difference between making a profit and breaking even, right?
Yeah.